Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 84 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. Yes, we're in chapter 28, which is titled Kapila's Instructions on the Execution of Devotional Service. And we're right at the end of this chapter 28, actually. Krishna. But we were not able to finish last time, so we'll finish this time. And then we'll go straight on to chapter 29. So, but first of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastichadesh Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Right, so verse 42. A yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations, for all that exists is a manifestation of different energies of the Supreme. In this way, the devotee should see all living entities without distinction. That is realization of the Supreme Soul. So first of all, Prabhupada refers to Brahma Samhita, Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam, which means that the Lord is so great that everything's within him, but he's so small, he's within the atom. So he's present everywhere, but in the dormant stage. And when one can see the presence of the Lord everywhere, then one is liberated from material designations. So in the second paragraph, Prabhupada says the word sarva bhuteshu is to be understood as follows. There are 4 different divisions of species. Here they are. Living entities which sprout from the earth, living entities born of fermentation or germination, living entities which come from eggs, and living entities which come from the embryo. So they expand into 8,400,000 species of life. So a person who's freed from designations can see the same quality of spirit present everywhere, manifest in every manifest entity. Yeah. So the less intelligent, Prabhupada says, they think plants and grass grow out of the earth automatically. But one who's more intelligent knows it's not like that the cause is the soul. So the scientist thinks the egg is lifeless, but actually there's a soul there. By fermentation, germs are born, but actually they're born from the soul. So from the Vedic literatures, we can understand that living entities in different forms are generated in different conditions. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the perfect vision of the yogi or devotee is that he sees the presence of the living entity everywhere. Verse 43, as fire is exhibited in different forms of wood, so under different conditions of the modes of material nature, the pure spirit soul manifests itself in different bodies. Okay, so there's a purport here. Bodies are designated. Yeah, so according Well, Prakriti is an interaction by the three modes, and according to the modes, someone has a small body, someone has a very big body. And Prabhupada gives the example that the fire in a big piece of wood appears very big, and in a stick, small stick, the fire appears small, but actually the quality of fire is the same everywhere. But the manifestation is such that according to the fuel, like the bigger piece of wood, it's more fuel, and the little twig is less fuel. So according to the fuel, the fire appears bigger or smaller. So similarly, the soul is of the same quality in everybody, but, let me just read that again. Similarly, the soul in the universal body, although of the same quality, is different from the soul in the smaller body, different in size. So the small particle, the second paragraph, small particles of soul are like sparks of a larger soul, and the greatest soul is the supersoul. But the supersoul is quantitatively different from the small soul, and it supplies all the necessities for the smaller soul. So one who understands this distinction between the supersoul and individual soul, one who really understands clearly, is above lamentation and is peaceful. Yes. So, but when the smaller soul thinks he's quantitatively as big as the large soul, he's under Maya. And no one can become greater by mental speculation. So the third paragraph, this is interesting and important. The smallness or greatness of different souls is described in the Varaha Purana as Swangsha and Vibhinangsha. Catch those two terms, Swangsha, Vibhinangsha. The Swamsha soul is the Supreme Lord. They're all different forms of the Supreme Lord. They're all Swamsha. The Vibhinamsha souls, small particles, they're eternally small. Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 verse 7 states, Mamai vangso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. The small living entities are eternally part and parcel. Therefore, it's not possible for them to be quantitatively as great as the supersoul. Right. Okay, so on to verse 44, which is the end of the chapter. Thus the yogi can be in the self-realized position after conquering the insurmountable spell of Maya, who presents herself as both the cause and effect of this material manifestation, and is therefore very difficult to understand. I mean, really very difficult. So, first paragraph, Bhagavad Gita tells us that the spell of Maya, which has covered our knowledge, it's insurmountable. But one who surrenders to Krishna can conquer it. So here it's stated that Daivi Prakriti, the external energy, is Durvibhavya. Yeah. Durvibhavya, which means very difficult to understand and very difficult to conquer. But we have to do that, and it's possible by the grace of the Lord when he reveals himself to the surrendered soul. So it's also stated here, Swarupena Vatishtate, remaining in the self-realized position. Swarup means you have to know that we're not the supreme soul, but rather we're part and parcel. That's self-realization. If you think you're the supreme soul and that we're all pervading, that's not the Swarup. It's not realization of our actual position. The real position is part and parcel. And it's recommended here that we must stay in that position. Bhagavad Gita defines this as Brahman realization. Right, okay, second paragraph. So after that, after you've realized your position as the eternal servant of the Lord, part and parcel, then you can engage in activities of Brahman. If you're not self-realized, you engage in activities based on thinking you're the body. But when you're situated in the real self, then the activities of Brahman, spiritual activities, begin. Activities of Brahman realization. You know, the Mayavadis say that after Brahman realization, all activities stop, but it's not true. If the soul is so active in the abnormal condition under matter, how can we deny activities when we're free? Prabhupada gives a very nice example. If a diseased man is active, how can we imagine he won't be active when he's well? But the thing is, the activities in the Brahman realized state are different from the conditioned state. But that doesn't mean there's no activities when you're realized at all. So again, Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita 1854, which says that after one realizes one is Brahman, devotional service begins. So therefore, devotional service is activity in Brahman realization. That's nice. And finally, very short purport, I'll just read it. Very short paragraph. End of the purport. For those who engage in devotional service, there is no spell of Maya, and their situation is all perfect. The duty of the living entity as a part and parcel of the whole is to render devotional service to the whole. That is the ultimate perfection of life. So there you go, devotees. Now we go on to chapter 29. Let's run through it in the usual way. Chapter 29, the title is Explanation of Devotional Service by Lord Kapila. There are 6 sections as follows. First section is verse 1 to verse 5. Devahuti inquires further. Second section, verse 6 to verse 10, Lord Kapila explains devotional service in the modes. Oh, Krishna, this is interesting. This is just very interesting. So that's verse 6 to verse 10. Lord Kapila explains devotional service in the modes. Then third section is from verse 11 to verse 27. Devotional service beyond the modes. Yes. Verse 11 to verse 27. Devotional service beyond the modes. Then fourth section, verse 28 to verse 30, Kapila explains different kinds of entities. Verse 28 to verse 30. Kapila explains different grades of entities. Then, fifth section, verse 31 to verse 36, different grades of humans. And finally, the sixth section, verse 37 to 45, the time factor, which everyone is afraid of, is a form of the Lord. Verse 37 to verse 45, the time factor, which everyone is afraid of, is a form of the Lord. Right, okay, so here we go, devotees. The first section, verse 1 to verse 5, Devahuti inquires further. Verses 1 to 2. Devahuti inquired, "My dear Lord, you've already very scientifically described the symptoms of the total material nature and the characteristics of the spirit according to the Sankhya system of philosophy. Now I shall request you to explain the path of devotional service, which is the ultimate end of all philosophical systems." Verse 3. I mean, that's quite something, isn't it? That is really quite something. Verse 3, Devahuti continued, "My dear Lord, please also describe in detail, both for me and for people in general, the continual process of birth and death. For by hearing of such calamities, we may become detached from the activities of this material world." Verse 4. "Please also describe eternal time, which is a representation of your form, and by whose influence people in general engage in the performance of pious activities." Verse 5. "My dear Lord, you are just like the sun, for you illuminate the darkness of the conditional life of the living entities. Because their eyes of knowledge are not open, they're sleeping eternally in that darkness without your shelter. And therefore, they're falsely engaged by the actions and reactions of their material activities, and they appear to be very fatigued." Right. Okay, so let's get into it here. Verses 1 to 2. Devahuti inquired, "My dear Lord, you've already very scientifically described the symptoms of the total material nature and the characteristics of the spirit according to the Sankhya system of philosophy. Now I shall request you to explain the path of devotional service, which is the ultimate end of all philosophical systems." Right, okay, let's have a look at the purport. Prabhupada mentions first of all that in this chapter 29, the glories of devotional service are explained elaborately, plus the influence of time on the conditioned soul is also described. So the purpose of describing time is to detach the conditioned soul from material activities, which are just a waste of time. So the previous chapter discussed material nature, the soul, and the super soul. So in this chapter, the principles of Bhakti Yoga, devotional service, they're explained. All right, that's good. So now, our second paragraph. So the thing is, Bhakti Yoga is the basic principle of all types of philosophy. Any philosophy which doesn't aim at devotional service is just mental speculation. But at the same time, very important point, Bhakti Yoga without a philosophical basis is just sentiment. Yeah. So Prabhupada explains, second paragraph, there are two classes of men. Some think they're intellectually advanced and they simply speculate and meditate, and others are sentimental and have no philosophical basis for their ideas, their propositions. So neither of these two classes can achieve the highest goal. If they do, it's really going to take many years. So anyway, Vedic literature explains that there are three elements: the Supreme Lord, the living entity, their eternal relationship. And the goal of life is to follow the principles of Bhakti and ultimately reach the Lord's planet as the eternal servitor. So, then now there's the third paragraph. So Sankhya, what's Sankhya? It's an analytical study of all existence, of everything. One has to understand everything by examining its nature and characteristics. But we shouldn't just acquire knowledge without reaching the goal of life, which is Bhakti Yoga. If we give up Bhakti Yoga and just study the nature of everything, the result will be nil, zero. So the Bhagavatam says that if you do like that, if you just study material nature, the result will be nil. But the Bhagavatam says doing like this is like husking a paddy. Yeah, well, when you beat a husk of rice or something else too, but the grain is already gone, you're wasting your time. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, by the scientific study of material nature, the living entity and the supersoul, one has to understand the basic principle of devotional service to the Lord. Okay, that's good. Verse 3, Devahuti continued, my dear Lord, please also describe in detail, both for me and for people in general, the continual process of birth and death. Please explain that. For by hearing of such calamities, we may become detached from the activities of this material world. Okay. So Prabhupada says that the word Shreya Sriti means the prosperous path of advancement towards the Lord. And Samsriti means continuing on the path of birth and death towards the darkest region of Maya. So people who don't know the material world, God and their realization, unfortunately they're going to the darkest region in the name of progress in material civilization. So darkest region, I mean, there are two possible ways of understanding what that means, but here it said that to enter the darkest region of material existence means to enter into a species of life other than human. Yeah. And fools don't know that after this life, they're completely under the grip of material nature, and they're going to be offered a standard of life which may not be very congenial. It may not be very enjoyable for them. So the next chapter is going to explain how the living entity gets different bodies. This is called samsara. So Devahuti then, because this was Devahuti speaking, Devahuti asks her son, Kapila Dev, to explain this journey, to convince the conditioned souls they're on the path of degradation by not understanding Bhakti Yoga. Okay, so now verse 4. Please also describe eternal time, which is a representation of your form, and by whose influence people in general engage in the performance of pious activities. So Prabhupada makes interesting point. However ignorant you may be about what is the path of good fortune and what is the path to the darkest region of ignorance, still everyone is aware of the influence of time, which destroys our material bodies. From the date of birth of the body, the influence of death is also acting. Yeah. Prabhupada says, if someone is 30 or 50 years old, time has already devoured 30 or 50 years of their life's duration. Second paragraph. Everyone conscious of the last stage of life, when they're going to meet the cruel hands of death. But some do pious acts to avoid going down into a low family or even into animal species. Of course, generally people want sense gratification, so they want to live in the heavenly planets. Therefore they do charitable work, etc. But as Bhagavad Gita says, one cannot escape birth and death, even if you go to Brahmaloka, because time is present everywhere in this world. Although in the spiritual world, there's no influence of the time factor. Verse 5. My dear Lord, you are just like the sun, for you illuminate the darkness of the conditional life of the living entities. Because your eyes of knowledge are not open, they're sleeping. They're sleeping eternally in that darkness without your shelter. And therefore they're falsely engaged by the actions and reactions of their material activities. And they appear to be very fatigued. So Prabhupada makes the point that it appears here that actually Mother Devahuti is very compassionate for those sleeping, suffering souls, people in general who are sleeping in illusion. So in general, the devotees, the Vaishnavas, feel these people should be awakened. So similarly, Devahuti is asking her son to illuminate the lives of the conditioned souls so that their conditional lives can be ended. The Lord is described here as Yoga Bhaskara, the son of the system of all yoga. And Kapila has already described Bhakti Yoga as the ultimate yoga system. So we go into the next paragraph. Bhakti Yoga is the sun-like illumination for delivering the conditioned souls, whose general condition is described in this verse. The conditioned souls don't have eyes to see their own interests. They don't know the goal of life is not to increase material necessities, because the body is living a few years. But actually they need to know that the living entities are eternal and they have eternal needs. If one only sees, if one only looks after the needs of the body and not one's eternal needs, then one is part of a civilization which puts the living entities into the darkest region of ignorance. Sleeping in that darkest region, one doesn't get any refreshment, but rather one gradually becomes fatigued. He invents many processes to adjust fatigue, but fails and remains confused. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the only path for mitigating his fatigue in the struggle for existence is the path of devotional service or the path of Krishna consciousness. Okay, so on we go to the second section from verse 6 to verse 10. Lord Kapila explains devotional service in the modes, verse 6 to verse 10. Okay, verse 6. This is Lord Kapila explaining devotional service in the modes, verse 6 to verse 10. Verse 6. Sri Maitreya said, O best amongst the Kurus, the great sage Kapila, moved by great compassion and pleased by the words of his glorious mother, spoke as follows. So, interesting purport. The Lord Kapila was very, very satisfied by his mother's request. Why? Because she was thinking of the welfare of the fallen conditioned souls and not just her personal welfare. The Lord, we must know, the Lord is always compassionate towards the conditioned souls. So he comes himself or sends his confidential servants to deliver the people. Since he's always compassionate, if he sees some devotee also being compassionate, he's pleased with them. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, people who try to elevate the fallen souls by preaching its conclusion to surrender to the Lord, that they're all very dear to Lord Krishna. So when Lord Kapila saw his beloved mother was so compassionate, he was pleased and became compassionate toward her. Verse 7. Lord Kapila, the personality of Godhead, replied, O noble lady, there are multifarious paths of devotional service in terms of the different qualities of the executor. So Prabhupada explains that even though pure devotional service is one, because there's no demand from the devotee to be fulfilled by him. Yeah. But generally people take to devotional service with a purpose in mind. They're looking to get something from it. So Bhagavad Gita, of course, talks about 4 categories of impure people who have 4 purposes. So one is distressed. He just wants mitigation of his distress. Another one is in need of money to make some improvement in his financial state. Yeah, so that's 2. One's in distress and the other needs money, which is a type of distress. So the others who are not in need, they're not in distress, neither are they in need of monetary assistance, but one of them is inquisitive and the other is really seeking knowledge in order to understand the absolute truth. So they also take to devotional service and inquire into the nature of the Lord. So this is all explained very nicely in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 16. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, actually the path of devotional service is one without a second, but according to the devotee's condition, devotional service appears in multifarious varieties, as will be explained in the following verses. So here we go, devotees. This is very interesting. You've got to listen to this very carefully. Verse 8. Devotional service executed by a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry, and who is a separatist, is considered to be in the mode of darkness. So, we already know, it's been stated in the Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 2nd chapter, that the highest, most glorious, the best religion is the attainment of causeless, unmotivated devotional service. So in pure devotional service, the only motive should be to please the Lord. And this is not a motive like an agenda, but it's the pure condition of the living entity. So in the conditioned state, when one does devotional service, what's he going to do? For purity, because he's impure. He's just coming from conditioned life. So when one does devotional service in the conditioned state, he should follow the spiritual master in full surrender, because the spiritual master is the manifested representation of the Lord. And he is that, the representation of the Lord, because he receives and presents instructions of the Lord as they are, by disciplic succession. So Bhagavad Gita describes that its teachings should be received by disciplic succession. Otherwise, if not, there's adulteration. There's going to be adulteration, for sure. So, but otherwise, to act under the direction of the spiritual master with a motive to satisfy the Lord, this is pure devotional service. But, if a person has a motive for personal sense gratification, his devotional service is manifested differently. Yeah. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, such a man may be violent, proud, envious, and angry, and his interests are separate from the Lord's. So there's a second paragraph here. One who approaches the Lord to do devotional service, but is proud of his personality, envious of others, or vengeful, is in the mode of anger. He thinks he's the best devotee. His devotional service is not pure. It's mixed and is of the lowest grade. Tamasha means ignorance, mode of ignorance. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that such a devotee who is not of good character should be avoided. But rather a Vaishnav is one who has taken the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. But if one is not pure and still has motives, then he's not a Vaishnav of the first order of good character. So one can offer respects to him because he's accepted the Lord as the goal of life, but one shouldn't keep company with such a devotee in ignorance. Verse 9, The worship of the deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. So Prabhupada makes the point in the beginning of the purport that the word separatist must be understood carefully. The Sanskrit term there are two terms possible, Binadrik and Pritag Bhava. Yes. Binadrig was used in verse 8 about the devotee in the mode of ignorance, and Pritag Bhava is used in this verse 9, and it means, well, a separatist. So, yeah, someone who sees his interest as separate from that of the Lord. So mixed devotees, or devotees in the modes of passion and ignorance, think, I mean, some of these people, it's very interesting. They think that the interest of the Lord, what the Lord wants to do, is to supply the orders of the devotee. And the interest of such devotees is just to take as much as they can from the Lord, so for their sense gratification. This is the separatist mentality. I mean, this is really like a full description of it. Pure devotion is going to be, or was described in the previous chapter. It means the minds of the Lord and the devotee should be dovetailed together. The devotee shouldn't wish to do anything but execute the desire of the Lord. That is oneness. But when a devotee has interest different from that of the Lord, his mentality is he's a separatist. When a devotee wants material enjoyment which is not in the interest of the Lord, or wants to become famous or opulent by the mercy of the Lord, he's in the mode of passion. So then the second paragraph, the Mayavadis interpret the word separatist in a different way. They say that when you worship the Lord, you should think that you are one with the Lord. This is another adulterated form of devotion in the modes. The conception that the living entity is one with the Lord is just ignorance. But actually, oneness is based on oneness of interest with the Lord. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, a pure devotee has no interest but to act on behalf of the Supreme Lord. When one has even a tinge of personal interest, his devotion is mixed with the three modes of material nature. Verse 10, when a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. So it sounds better, it is better, isn't it, than being a violent, angry devotee or wanting to use Krishna consciousness for sense gratification. I mean, this is basically nice. The devotee in goodness wants to get free from attachment to materialistic life. So, okay, Srila Prabhupada gives us the purport. So, first thing, the members of the Varnas and Ashrams, all of them, they have their particular duties to perform for the satisfaction of the Lord. And when they do these things like this, and that the results are offered to the Lord, then they're called karmarpanam. Karmarpanam. Duties performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. So if there is some fault there, because in this world, it's very difficult to avoid at least, some fault. So if there is some fault there, it becomes atoned for by this offering process. But having said that, if the offering process is in goodness and not pure, then the interest is different. So what does that mean? This offering is done, as the verse says, because we want to purify ourselves, we want to improve ourselves. So then it's in goodness. So that means the interest is different. Because the pure devotee's interest is the same as the Lord. Yeah. So therefore, devotees in goodness can't be counted as being pure devotees. Their service can't be counted as pure devotional service. Because pure devotional service, Srila Rupa Goswami says, is free from all material desires, even good ones. So then Srila Prabhupada quotes very, very famous verse, extremely famous verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. In fact, it's sort of the fundamental verse which establishes, it's called the Paribhas Sutra, means the verse which establishes what is the subject matter of a book. Yeah. And I mean, just seeing I've mentioned that. And Yadilashita Shunyam Gyana Karamajinaritam Anukulyena Krishna Nushilanam Bhaktir Uttama means that in order for an activity to be pure devotional service, it must be done for Krishna. It must not be interrupted by any other type of activity. It must be done in a favorable mood. Anukulyena means favorable mood. Krishna for Krishna. Anushilanam, and must be unbroken, ongoing. And so those are positive things that must be there. And then it must be done without any other desire than pleasing the Lord. And it must be done not as like materialistic religion to get some material thing. And it must be done not on the basis of mental speculation or impersonal speculation. So there can be no excuse. If we're trying to cultivate pure devotional service, there can be no excuse for personal or material interest. Devotional activities should be transcendental to material activities and mental speculation. So pure devotional service is transcendental to all material qualities. So in the second paragraph, the point is there that devotional service in the modes can be divided into 81 categories, because there are 3 modes. You multiply them by 3, you get 9. You multiply 9 by 3, you get 27. You multiply 27 by 3, and you get 81. Right. So therefore Prabhupada says here, devotional service in the modes can be divided into 81 categories. There are 9 9 main devotional activities. Each one of them can be done in the modes. Yes. So there's hearing and passion, hearing and ignorance, hearing and goodness, chanting and ignorance, chanting and passion, chanting and goodness. And then the calculation I gave, 3 times 9, 27, 3 times 27, 81. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one has to transcend all such mixed, materialistic devotional service in order to reach the standard of pure devotional service, as explained in the next verses. So actually we have a couple of minutes, but we'll stop here. And tomorrow we'll go on into the next section, which is about pure devotional service. Devotional service beyond the modes. Verse 11 to verse 27. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.